Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that the richest people on Earth sometimes pay a lower tax rate than ordinary workers. Sounds impossible. After all, if someone earns billions of dollars, shouldn't they pay billions in taxes? Yet somehow, many billionaires legally avoid paying huge amounts of tax. Not by hiding money, not by breaking the law, but by using a system that most people don't even know exists. A system so powerful that some of the world's wealthiest individuals have used it for decades. The biggest thing people get wrong about billionaires. Okay, before we talk about taxes, we need to clear up one huge misunderstanding. And honestly, this is probably the biggest reason people get confused whenever they hear about billionaires paying less tax. Most people think wealth and income are the same thing. They're not even close. Think about your own life for a second. If you work a job and your boss sends you a paycheck, that's income. If you run a business and customers pay you, that's income. Money comes in, the government sees it, and taxes it. Pretty straightforward. But here's where things get interesting. When you hear that someone like a billionaire is worth $50 billion, most people imagine a giant bank account with $50 billion sitting inside, like some giant vault from a movie. Stacks of cash, gold bars, private jets parked outside. You know, the typical billionaire fantasy. But in reality, that's usually not how their wealth looks at all. In fact, a lot of billionaires don't have most of their wealth sitting in cash. Their wealth is tied up in things they own: stocks, companies, real estate, investments, ownership. And ownership behaves very differently from income. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine you own a small lemonade stand. Nothing crazy, just a simple lemonade stand. One day, somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I think your lemonade stand is worth $100. Cool." Then next year, more people start buying lemonade. Business gets better. Now someone says, "I'd pay $1,000 for that lemonade stand." Congratulations. On paper, you're now richer. But did anybody actually hand you $1,000? No. Did money enter your bank account? No. Did you sell the lemonade stand? No. You're richer, but you didn't actually receive any cash. Now take that exact idea and scale it up to billions of dollars. That's basically how many billionaires become richer every year. The companies they own become more valuable. The stocks they own go up. Their assets grow. Their net worth increases. But they often haven't sold anything. And that's the key detail. Because in many tax systems, simply becoming wealthier on paper doesn't automatically create a tax bill. Usually, taxes happen when gains become realized. In other words, when you actually sell. And trust me, that small detail is where the entire game begins. Because once you understand the difference between income and ownership, everything else starts making sense. And the next strategy billionaires use is where things start getting really crazy: the billion-dollar stock trick. Now that you understand the difference between income and wealth, let's talk about something that sounds completely ridiculous at first. Imagine you buy a stock for $1 million. A few years pass. The company grows, investors get excited, the stock keeps going up, and eventually, that $1 million investment becomes worth $100 million. That's a gain of $99 million. Pretty insane, right? Now here's my question. Did anybody actually hand you $99 million? No. Did money suddenly appear in your bank account? No. Did you sell anything? No. So even though you're dramatically richer on paper, you haven't actually converted that wealth into cash. And that's where many people get confused. Because when the news says, Jeff Bezos gained $10 billion today, or Elon Musk became $20 billion richer this year, a lot of people imagine giant trucks backing up to their houses and unloading money. But that's not what happened. Usually, the value of assets they own increased. Their shares became more valuable. Their ownership became more valuable. But they didn't necessarily sell anything. Think about owning a house. Let's say you bought a house for $100,000. 10 years later, it's worth $500,000. You're technically $400,000 richer. But unless you sell the house, you can't walk into a store and spend that gain. The same principle applies to stocks. Now scale that up from houses to billion-dollar companies. That's where things start getting interesting. Because billionaires often spend years, sometimes decades, avoiding the sale altogether. And as long as they don't sell, many of those gains remain unrealized. No sale, no realization, no immediate tax event. And that tiny rule creates one of the biggest advantages in modern wealth building. The wealthy understand that selling can be expensive, so they look for ways to keep ownership while still accessing money. And that's exactly where the next strategy comes in. A strategy so famous, people literally gave it a nickname: buy, borrow, die. Okay, this is the chapter everybody talks about. And honestly, when I first learned about this strategy, I had to read it twice, because it almost sounds like a loophole from a video game. Here's how it works. Step 1. Buy assets. Pretty simple. Stocks, businesses, real estate, anything that has a good chance of increasing in value over time. That's the easy part. Now imagine those assets grow for 20 years. Maybe your stock portfolio is worth $500 million. Maybe it's worth $5 billion, maybe even more. At this point, most people assume the billionaire sells some shares, gets cash, pays taxes, and goes shopping. But here's where wealthy people often do something different. Instead of selling, they borrow. Think about it. If you own shares worth $1 billion, would a bank lend you money? Probably, because from the bank's perspective, you're one of the safest customers on earth. You already own assets worth far more than the loan. So the bank says, sure, here's $50 million, or maybe $100 million. Now suddenly you have spending money. You can buy houses, travel, invest, start new businesses, do whatever you want. And here's the crazy part. Loans generally aren't treated like income, because technically, you're supposed to pay them back. So while ordinary people work for income, some wealthy individuals live on borrowed money backed by appreciating assets. Now obviously, it's not magic. Loans have interest, there are risks, asset values can fall, things can go wrong. But for extremely wealthy people with enormous holdings, this strategy can be incredibly powerful. Because while they're spending borrowed money, their original assets may continue growing, their stocks continue rising, their businesses continue expanding, their wealth keeps compounding. And then we arrive at the final word: die. Yeah, not the most cheerful chapter title, but it's important. Because in some countries, inherited assets can receive favorable tax treatment, meaning gains accumulated over decades may be treated differently when passed to heirs. That's why people call the strategy buy, borrow, die. 3 simple words, one extremely powerful wealth-building concept, and understanding it explains why some billionaires think completely differently about money than the average person. The real estate advantage. Now let's talk about another billionaire favorite, real estate. And trust me, this isn't just about buying a fancy apartment and waiting for prices to go up. We're talking about an entire system filled with tax incentives. Let's imagine 2 people. Person number 1 earns a salary. Money comes in, taxes come out. Pretty straightforward. Person number 2 owns multiple apartment buildings, shopping centers, office spaces, warehouses, rental properties. Suddenly, things become much more complicated because governments often want investment. They want buildings developed, businesses opened, housing created, jobs generated. So tax systems frequently include incentives for property owners. Now, one of the most famous concepts is depreciation, and honestly, this confuses almost everybody at first. Imagine owning a building. Even if the property's market value rises, tax rules may allow portions of the structure to be depreciated over time, which can reduce taxable income. Sounds weird, I know. A building can be becoming more valuable in the real world while still creating deductions on paper. That's one reason many investors love real estate. Then you add financing, interest expenses, maintenance expenses, operating costs, management costs, and suddenly there are multiple legal deductions available. Again, this isn't about breaking the rules. It's about understanding the rules. And that's the difference. Most people see taxes as something that happens after money is made. Many sophisticated investors see taxes as something to plan for before the investment is even made. The result? 2 people can earn similar amounts of money, yet end up paying very different amounts in tax, simply because one understands how the system works better than the other. And that's why some of the wealthiest families in history built their fortunes around real estate, not just because properties can appreciate, but because the tax advantages can be incredibly powerful over long periods of time. The charity strategy. Now let's talk about something that surprises a lot of people: charity. Because when most people hear that billionaires donate millions or even billions of dollars, the reaction is usually one of two things. Either, wow, that's incredibly generous, or they're only doing it for tax reasons. But the truth? Like most things involving money, it's usually more complicated than that. Let's imagine you bought stock years ago for $1 million. Over time, that stock becomes worth $100 million. You now have a gain of $99 million. If you sell it, you may owe taxes on that gain. But what if instead of selling, you donate some of those shares directly to a charitable organization? Now things become interesting, because in many tax systems, donating appreciated assets can provide tax benefits while also supporting charitable causes. The charity receives valuable assets, the donor may receive deductions, and everyone walks away benefiting in some way. Now, before anybody jumps to conclusions, this doesn't automatically mean the donation wasn't genuine. Many billionaires have funded hospitals, universities, medical research, scholarship programs, disease prevention, disaster relief, and countless other projects that have helped millions of people. But at the same time, the tax advantages are real, and wealthy people know they exist. Think about it this way. If you were going to donate anyway, wouldn't you choose the method that gives the biggest financial advantage? Most people probably would. And that's exactly why teams of accountants and advisors spend years helping wealthy individuals structure charitable giving. Because when you're dealing with hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars, small tax differences can become enormous. The result? Charity becomes more than just generosity. It becomes part of a larger financial strategy. And whether you think that's brilliant or controversial depends on who you ask. The world of offshore structures. Okay, this is the chapter that movies absolutely love. Whenever people hear the words offshore account, they immediately picture a secret island, palm trees, hidden vaults, a mysterious banker in a suit, and a billionaire hiding money somewhere nobody can find it. But reality is usually much less dramatic and much more complicated. You see, large corporations often operate in dozens of countries at the same time. They have employees around the world, customers around the world, investments around the world, and because of that, their financial structures can become incredibly complex. Now, sometimes companies choose to establish entities in countries that offer favorable tax treatment. Other times, they use international subsidiaries for legitimate business operations. And over the years, entire industries have emerged around helping corporations navigate these systems. Law firms, tax specialists, consultants, financial advisors, all working to understand thousands of pages of regulations. And here's the thing, governments know this is happening. In fact, governments around the world have spent years trying to close loopholes and increase transparency. Some rules have become stricter, reporting requirements have increased, and international cooperation between tax authorities has grown significantly. But the reality remains the same. The global financial system is incredibly complicated, and whenever rules become complicated, opportunities often appear. That's why some multinational corporations can end up paying dramatically different effective tax rates compared to what ordinary people expect. Not necessarily because they're breaking the law, but because they have access to teams of experts whose entire job is understanding every detail of the system. Think about that for a second. The average person files taxes once a year. Large corporations may have hundreds of specialists thinking about taxes every single day, and that's a huge advantage, because information itself can become a form of wealth. And now, we arrive at the biggest question of all. Is it fair? Because everything we've discussed so far is only half the story. The other half is the debate. On one side, people argue that billionaires are simply following the rules. After all, governments create tax laws. Governments create incentives. Governments decide what is legal. If the system allows certain strategies, why wouldn't people use them? In this view, the problem isn't the billionaire. The problem is the rule book. And if society doesn't like the outcome, then society should change the rules. But critics see things differently. They argue that ordinary workers don't have access to the same opportunities. A teacher can't borrow against a billion-dollar stock portfolio. A factory worker doesn't have a team of tax attorneys. A small business owner can't hire 20 accountants to analyze every possible strategy. So critics ask, if two people benefit from the same economy, shouldn't they contribute proportionally? It's a question that's been debated for decades, and honestly, there isn't a simple answer. Because the issue isn't just about taxes, It's about incentives, it's about fairness, it's about opportunity, and ultimately, it's about how society decides wealth should work. Some people believe high taxes discourage innovation. Others believe low taxes increase inequality. Some argue billionaires create jobs. Others argue wealth becomes concentrated at the top. And the debate continues year after year, election after election, generation after generation. Because underneath all the numbers, all the spreadsheets, and all the tax codes, there's a much bigger question. What kind of economic system do we want to build? And that's a question every country continues to wrestle with, even today. So, let's go back to the question we started with. How do billionaires avoid taxes? The answer isn't hidden treasure. It's not secret underground vaults. And most of the time, it's not even illegal. The real answer is far less exciting and far more powerful. They understand the rules. That's it. They understand the system. While most people focus on earning income, the ultra-wealthy often focus on ownership. While most people think about this month, the wealthy think about decades. While most people ask, how much money can I make? The wealthy often ask, how can I structure what I already own? And that difference changes everything. Because modern wealth isn't just about money. It's about assets, leverage, ownership, strategy, information, and patience. A lot of patience. The billionaire who appears to get richer overnight often spent decades building the assets that made it possible. And whether you admire that or criticize it, understanding it is important. Because you can't understand modern wealth without understanding how taxes work. And you can't understand taxes without understanding ownership. So the next time you see a headline saying, another billionaire added $20 billion to their fortune, pause for a second and ask yourself, did they actually receive $20 billion? Or did the value of something they owned simply go up? Because once you understand that distinction, you start seeing the financial world completely differently. And suddenly, the game the wealthy are playing becomes visible, a game that most people don't even realize exists.